Sony cameras are boring. Sony cameras are not ergonomic. Sony cameras have terrible color signs and skin tones look artificial. These are all biased assumptions posed by the online community, as over the years I've tested a variety of cameras here on the channel, including the Canon R6 Mark II, the R5, the Nikon Z6 III, and I've even experimented with Fujifilm. But I have this tendency to default back to my Sony cameras, even though I've attempted many times to leave. So today I want to explain the reasons for this behavior and when and where I use or neglect my Sony A7 IV, and discuss the 3 major flaws that these Sony cameras have that for some reason nobody here on YouTube is talking about. Let's jump right into it. Sony cameras are boring. I've recently experienced that maturing as a photographer means aiming to have a camera that does the job, does not get in the way, and behaves as expected, meaning a boring, dull camera. This means you can focus on creating creative images without wasting your time on issues like poor autofocus, inconsistent lenses, or fumbling around with clunky dials to change your settings. You can rely solely on the camera and focus on your photography. Now, full transparency guys, I have also held the opinion that a Sony camera does not inspire me to go out and shoot, and I find it quite boring to use. But there's definitely a time and place for fantastic cameras like this Nikon ZF, the Fujifilm X100VI, or the GR3. I believe that these compact and discreet cameras are best suited for that purpose of travel, as I still don't feel inspired to take my Sony camera out unless I'm going out to create a print or something similar. Now, I feel that Sony, Canon, and potentially Nikon, apart from the autofocus, are camera brands that you can rely on to be boring. However, the one thing that sets Sony apart is the lenses and the third-party support. Now guys, I'm the kind of person who always looks for the best quality at the best price. That's why I exclusively shoot with Sigma and Tamron lenses on my Sony bodies, and I don't own a single G Master lens. It's not that Sony lenses are bad, they're far from it, but when I can get the same or similar performance and buy 2 lenses for the price of 1, it's really a no-brainer. Viltrox is now stepping into the ring as well with their new Lab series lenses, and honestly it's amazing how far third-party glass has come, and you can pretty much build a full professional lens kit without touching a single Sony G Master lens. Canon on the other hand has completely locked down the RF mount, and I have to say I think it's kind of greedy. Their new 24mm f1.4L lens has terrible distortion, and yet it's $1,500 USD. I'm not paying that much for a lens with that kind of flaw. I've even looked extensively to switch to Nikon recently, but once I realized Sigma doesn't natively support the Z mount and I needed to use a Sony adapter, that was just a deal breaker for me. Nikon does support Tamron and Viltrox for whatever reason, which is great, and their own lenses are fantastic, but man, they are expensive. And guys, what's the point of spending $2,500 USD on a lens attached to a body where the autofocus will not take full advantage of that lens? I can confidently say that Sony and Canon have the best algorithms for autofocus. While I believe Canon may have a slight advantage over Sony, I mention this because I just don't have the extensive experience with Canon like I do with Sony. However, I do hire photographers and videographers for my wedding photography business who shoot on Canon, and they perform just as well as Sony. They just never miss. This is true for both photo and video, particularly when shooting portraits with a shallow depth of field at a fast burst rate. That is where you're really going to notice the difference. My Sony cameras with third-party lenses attached have a 99% hit rate, with that 1% usually being user error or slightly less than 100% sharp on the eye. And I don't understand how in 2025, Nikon especially and Fujifilm still have poor autofocus algorithms. But one advantage that Nikon and Canon have over Sony is ergonomics. Sony ergonomics are not amazing at a first glance, but upon deeper examination, I actually believe that Sony is better, and here's why. The argument I would like to make is that Sony has designed their cameras to look the same way for a reason. If you pick up a Sony A1, an A9 III, or even this 4-year-old Sony A7IV, they all feel similar in the hand. You can customize the camera in a compatible way, meaning that all the buttons are in a similar location. In contrast, my friends who shoot with the Canon R6 and an R5 find that the layout of the camera is completely different, which frustrates them. They often express a desire for the Canon R6 to have a certain layout like the R5 and vice versa. And thinking outside of the box, this large object right here is a water housing for my Sony A7 IV. I've just bought this recently and I haven't had the time to take it out yet, but I can fit several different variations of Sony bodies in this water housing and all function and operate the same or a similar way. This consistency is why I think the ergonomics of Sony cameras present a significant advantage. Now, lastly, before we jump into the flaws of Sony cameras, a common point of debate among many photographers is image quality. And I don't want to spend too long on image quality, so I'll keep this brief. Color science does not matter. I've made 2 full videos on how to get the best colors and skin tones from any camera. You can go check those videos out in the description down below. And the reality is Sony manufactures most of these sensors. Camera brands might have their own look, but that mostly applies to the JPEG images. When you're shooting RAW and bring those files into Lightroom with Adobe profiles, you're neutralizing a lot of the color and contrast anyway. For video, S-Log3 is just as usable as N-Log, C-Log2, and V-Log. I personally stick with Sony mainly because of the autofocus and this monitor and control app, which lets me control everything from my iPhone or my iPad. Super helpful when I'm filming myself or I'm covering weddings solo. For me, image quality comes down to good lenses and reliable autofocus. And the actual sensor performance is basically the same across the board. Now guys, before we jump into the 3 major flaws of Sony cameras that drives me nuts, I want to quickly announce a new partnership with PicTime. Now guys, if you are or aspiring to be a professional photographer and you don't know what PicTime is, then you need to integrate PicTime into your business ASAP. I've been using PicTime for the last 4 years to deliver galleries and upsell prints to my wedding clients. Now I'm actually moving away from weddings and I'm doing more brand and fashion work. My new clients can pick their favorite images in the portal and I can pull those selects straight into Lightroom for editing and retouching. So if you are a photographer and you want to try out PicTime, use my code Gerard for an extra month free. And this video is not sponsored by PicTime, just an amazing online platform that's a major pillar in my business model. Over the years, I've run into a few real issues with Sony cameras, and while some things come down to user error or just getting used to the menu system, there are 3 major flaws I think people should be talking about. Number 1, the hot shoe. For some reason, whenever moisture, rain, or snow gets onto this hot shoe, a message pops up saying incompatible accessory attached. This is likely due to the exposed electronic connections in here, but it's a real problem if you shoot outdoors. This actually caught me out during a wedding first dance, where my flash trigger just suddenly stopped working right at the moment I needed it the most. Luckily, I did have a backup camera and was able to switch everything over just in time. But yeah, definitely a word of warning. Definitely use the hot shoe cover unless you're like me and you've already lost it. Number 2, the mechanical shutter. The mechanical shutter on Sony cameras, especially the A7 IV, is just unreliable. It's loud, it sounds cheap, and fails way too early. My first Sony A7 IV died after about 18 months and around 170,000 acquisitions, and the second one broke even earlier in under 10 months and fewer than 100,000 clicks. By comparison, I've got friends using the Canon R6 and R5 bodies that are just cruising past 500,000 acquisitions, cameras, and let's not forget the Canon 1DX, which is legendary for consistently hitting over 1 million clicks. Yes, both my cameras were still in warranty, but Sony only covers by time, not by shutter count, which feels backwards to me. Not everyone shoots a lot of images at weddings. Some may be a brand or hotel photographer, or even a hobbyist who might not even reach 100,000 acquisitions in 2 years. And honestly, I suspect that this isn't just related to the A7 IV, the A1 and the A7R5 have the same loud, plastically sounding shutter. And it wouldn't surprise me if they had the same issue. Number 3, terrible support. When my first A7 IV died, it took 3 months to get it repaired, and I had to send it in 3 times to the repair facility that wasn't even Sony owned. After the first repair, I went out for a portrait shoot and I shot about 100 images that were completely white. The shutter was stuck at 1/250, even though the live view was showing 1/4000. So when the camera came back again, the shutter was still off, about 1/3 of a stop darker than the live view or the electronic shutter. So I had to send it back again right in the middle of a very busy wedding season. That meant me having to buy a third backup camera just to keep working. Then when my second A7 IV failed, it took a full week just to convince Sony support that the shutter was even broken, and a total of 6 weeks for the total repair. And guys, here is the kicker. Even if you pay for Sony's Pro support, they don't offer loan cameras. If this was Canon or Nikon, they'll ship you a replacement the next day and fast track your repair. Alright guys, I just want to finish on saying that no camera is perfect, and the perfect camera is the camera that fits your needs as a photographer, videographer, or content creator, whatever you're doing. If you like the way that I edit my photos, go check out my presets. They're linked in the description down below. And if you want to see how to get the best colors despite your camera brand, go check out this video right here. And if you want to get the best skin tones out of your camera despite the camera brand, go check out this video. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.